some of the content is going to vary in complexity. You may be aware of the various technical levels. So we're going to cover content varying from level 200 all the way to 400. And also the downloading the PowerPoint deck is not going to give you all of the content because there will be some demos involved in this webcast. So if you can, try to download the recording instead of just the PowerPoint presentation alone. Also setting some expectations, DirSync is actually going to be replacing DirSync, and actually it, in many spheres has already. And it's actually not the final iteration of our directory synchronization products into the cloud, but the general similar concepts still apply because DirSync runs the same FIM sync engine as DirSync. So whatever troubleshooting concepts you will hear in this presentation can also be applied to DirSync. Lastly, I'm not going to be looking at the instant messaging window for questions until the very, very end, so you might want to hold off on some of those questions, or you can talk amongst yourselves on the chat as well. Moving on. So the agenda is quite straightforward. We're going to talk about some of the common issues that we're seeing in the support queues with DirSync, some of the common troubleshooting tools to resolve some of the supportability issues, and finally we're going to go through some resource links and then questions at the very end. Throughout this presentation, we will be referencing pieces of terminology that I want to make sure that you guys are all aware of. Also, how does DirSync work in a normal scenario? I want to make sure that as I talk about the various components of DirSync, that everyone has a general grasp of what the high-level overview is. So, for example, I'm not sure if I can annotate here. On the left-hand side, you create objects in Active Directory. Your DirSync appliance is actually running a couple of management agents, the Active Directory Connector Management Agent and the Windows Azure Active Directory Connector Management Agent. Those two management agents will work in tandem to write data into either SQL Express or the SQL database, which is also in many spheres referred to as just the metaverse. And then the management agent reads the data out of that intermediary database out of SQL and writes it into Azure AD. And communication is all over, typically over HTTPS, so that would be TCP 443. So when it does work, you will eventually see objects in the, here we go, here's the annotation. You'll eventually see objects in the Azure Active Directory, and you can view them directly using the online portal. And if you actually license an object for Exchange Online, or if the on-premises object has an Exchange mailbox on premises, you will eventually see that object show up in the Exchange Online directory, which is actually a completely separate forest as well. We have some separate provisioning workflows that push objects from Azure Active Directory, and depending upon what state they're in, and in some cases whether or not they're licensed for certain products, they will show up in the corresponding SaaS applications, which in many cases are represented by additional forests in the background, which are actually abstracted from you, the administrator's view. But if you were wondering, why does it take a new object that you created in Azure Active Directory and license it for Exchange? Why does it take an additional 10 minutes, for example, in some cases to show up in the Exchange Online directory? And that's because we run some forward provisioning rules to do some validation checks and such. Anyway, without getting too far down into the weeds on how it does work, let's now start talking about what happens when it starts breaking. So we're going to kind of sort of organize this from most often occurring to probably least often occurring issues. Some of the issues in the field are, in fact, most of the issues in the field are blockages of DirSync due to duplicate proxy addresses. So this is our most common issue. So if you start off with an object on premises, it may be a contact, it may be a contractor, for example, and DirSync replicates that first Azure Active Directory. It will show up in the Exchange Online directory as also a contact. Now, a lot of times, customers will use scripts or other methods of object injection into their on-premises Active Directory. And when DirSync picks up on these new mailbox objects on premises, it will try to replicate them into the cloud. Oftentimes, however, the automated provisioning applications that create mailboxes on premises don't go through the extensive validation and character checks that the Exchange APIs perform. As an example, I'm going to see if I can present my secondary monitor here. Let's see. All right, let me know when you guys are able to see my screen there. Great. All right, so as an example, we have an object that replicated into, that was created first called Contractor Bob. Bob is a contractor, but he might also eventually become an employee. Originally, when he was working at our organization, his mailbox was external to this on-premises organization. So that's why he shows up as a mail contact. He's got an external email address of tailspintoys.com, but by virtue of him existing in the Exchange on-premises directory, he also has the local company, Contoso's email domain name. All right, so DirSync actually replicated Bob's object to Azure Active Directory, and we can see that represented by going under the portal and going under active users, and you can actually see Contractor Bob. Now, he is, in the on-premises universe, a mail-enabled user, not a mailbox-enabled user. If we look at Bob's representation in the Exchange Online forest, or I should say, like Exchange Online directory, which should be loading up here soon, and go to recipients, and then contacts, we'll see that Contractor Bob does exist here. Now, we're about to make him an employee, so we went ahead and stamped the employee Bob email address. So it's got the same email domain name suffix, but a different left-hand side. And let's say a provisioning application also created the on-premises object representing Bob, and we also have his on-premises mailbox. So now we have employee Bob, who happens to have these email addresses. The fact that he's got a conflicting email address on two objects on premises will eventually cause DirSync to fail on this object. And so if we go to one of the typically what will happen is the new hire, in this case Bob, doesn't get any mail into his on-premises mailbox, and so users or Bob complains of having an empty mailbox or some other ability to even log on to his on-premises mailbox. What you can typically do is look at the DirSync console and look at the list of look at the operations. This will tell you all of the previous DirSync runs, and you can go to the export errors. Well, first of all, how would you even know that there is an error here? The errors actually depend on whether or not what type of DirSync issue this is. In this case, it's just an individual object type of error, not a whole entire DirSync service error. So you actually won't see the issue under the Management Agents tab. The Management Agents, again, if you remember the high-level overview slide, contains the two management agents. The Active Directory connector reads and writes to and from the Metaverse, and the Windows Azure Active Directory connector reads and writes to and from Azure Active Directory. The Operations tab will actually show you each set of 4 cycles. We do 2 Delta import syncs into the Metaverse, and then we export from the Metaverse into the corresponding 2 directories. In this case, when the management agent tries to export its changes to Active Directory, we see that it has export errors. And when we look at the export errors, and then we look at the export in progress, we can see that the old value in Azure Active Directory was blank. It did not exist. And then the new value that we're trying to upload into Azure Active Directory is on the right-hand pane here. All right, so what's the issue? Well, if we look at the actual error and look at the detail, it'll actually tell us that, hey, we've got some attribute conflicts, and in this case, it has to do with the proxy addresses attribute. But same token, if I look at my my on-premises mailbox that's associated with my tenant, I also get a summary of the DirSync issues. Right. So this event description here almost matches what we see here. And so this one's fairly straightforward, right? How do I identify the object on premise that happens to have the offending email address? Well, I'm going to do one of 2 things. If I happen to have the IDFix tool installed, which I will talk about later, IDFix will actually give me a list of all the objects on premises that have not only conflicting email addresses, but also bad characters in the email address field, bad characters in the UPN value, bad characters in other Exchange attributes that will eventually cause issues with either DirSync, or if it doesn't cause issues with DirSync, they will cause eventual problems once they are written into the service. And therefore, the IDFix is the first of the tools, which I will again have a slide on later, to identify the issue. The other issue is, the other tool that I would leverage is an on-premises tool, and that actually comes with the Exchange management tools. What I can do here is I can take each and every single one of these addresses that is reported as offending, and go to any on-premises Exchange server. Let's choose an Exchange 2007 server, and run the get-recipient commandlet. Again, this is using an Exchange 2007 management tool. It's actually the Exchange management shell, and I can search for these addresses iteratively. And so in this case, I have 2 objects returned back. This is actually, if we forget about Exchange Online for a second, and we forget about Office 365, and we concentrate strictly on Exchange on premises, the fact that we get 2 objects returned from a single email address is by itself a misconfiguration within our on-premises Active Directory. We should never expect to see 2 objects with the same email address. The beauty about get-recipient is that it not only looks at the proxy addresses of multiple objects within our Active Directory forest, but it also looks at other attribute fields as well, such as the mail attribute, as well as the legacy Exchange DN attribute. That's why I consider get-recipient a very useful tool to run on premises, so that you know which object to get rid of. In many cases, well, in this case it's pretty clear because the names are spelled out very easily in my lab. However, in production, you may have an acquisition where originally you had contacts from a company in your on-premises organization, but that's all they were. They were just directory objects representing an external company. Now, if you bought that external company and you used a provisioning application to both create mailboxes, you would see 2 entries with the same names possibly. And so you do want to pay attention to the recipient type column. And in many cases, all you have to do is get rid of the mail contact, or in this case, the mail user, the object that actually existed first. Keep in mind that when DirSync runs and it reads objects from your Active Directory forest, it will read items, and your DCs, your domain controllers, will return objects in the order in which they were created. And as such, DirSync will actually create objects in Azure Active Directory in that same order. All right, so I talked about 2 remediation tools. Let me go ahead and stop presenting and then switch back to the PowerPoint deck. I'm not sure if Monica is able to show that again, but what I can do is I can also share out the PowerPoint deck again. Go ahead and reshare that. Okay,
Hi,
thank you.
Vincent, I just loaded it for you.
Awesome. So let's move forward. All right. So what happens if we get rid of that object, the offending object? If we delete it from the on-premises organization, in the cloud, the object does not truly get deleted. That contractor Bob object will appear in the deleted objects container in Azure Active Directory. And because it exists in the deleted objects container with its prior SMTP addresses, if you try to, again, replicate the employee Bob object into Azure Active Directory, DirSync is still going to report an error. So what you want to do is also look in, not just in the Exchange Online directory, but also in Azure Active Directory in the deleted objects container. You can look at the deleted objects container either using the portal or using PowerShell, using the get-msol user with the return deleted objects parameter. I'm sorry, return deleted users parameter. And then you can also get rid of them using the remove msol user with the remove deleted objects parameter. Now,
Vincent?
Yep.
I just want to make sure we're on the correct slide. I'm on slide 5 for you.
Oh, interesting. I moved over to slide 7. So
okay.
Let me go ahead and let's see if I can take over as presenter here.
Yep, great.
Okay, now do you see slide 7?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
All right, so okay, moving on to, so again, not only do you want to delete the object from on-premises Active Directory and let DirSync replicate that deletion, you also want to make sure that that object is cleared out of Azure Active Directory from its recycle bin. Okay, so the second most common issue is a problem with DirSync in its entirety. If all of a sudden one day all of the changes that you've been creating on premises, that you've been making on premises, do not propagate to Azure Active Directory, something that affects the entire DirSync appliance is awry here, and that would be the second most common issue, and that is the expiry of the password for the global admin account. When you originally set up the DirSync appliance, you would have run the DirSync configuration wizard, specified an account on premises, and also you would have specified an administrative account in the cloud. This administrative account in the cloud would have had global administrator credentials in Azure Active Directory so that it can create and delete everything in Azure Active Directory. So by default, the global admin account has a password expiry of I believe every 90 days or so, and then you've also and so after the 90-day period expires, you actually have to log into the portal, and you're going to be forced to change the password. For DirSync, you probably want to set the password never expires parameter to true, so that you don't have to go through the changing the password example every 3 months. However, if you do have a strict security policy where you must change passwords, then you want to go ahead and set up a reminder in Outlook or something just to pop up so that you will be aware of the password change requirement. Also, if you log on to the portal with a global admin account, the portal will also have a toast icon at the top navigation bar, the top blue bar, that actually tells you the warning saying that your global admin account password is going to expire soon. Actually, you know what? I think I made a mistake here. Event ID 4. Ignore that first bullet here. Event ID 4 actually is will signal that DirSync completed replication successfully. However, every once in a while the service might be a little bit too busy, and And so the service is going to tell your DirSync appliance to back off. In such an event, my memory is a little fuzzy here. I think it might be event ID 81, but I could be mistaken. Whatever the case, that event log entry within the application log of your DirSync server will actually say that DirSync service is that the cloud service is too busy, and DirSync will continue again in a few minutes. This is actually not a serious issue, but just so that you're aware, every once in a while the service starts getting loaded up by lots of other large migrations or large organizations doing their first initial full DirSync load. In such scenarios, we do throttle various tenants if they're too chatty with the service. Okay. Okay. So if now we also have a lot of customers when they're setting up DirSync for the first time, they have problems getting DirSync to work, and no objects on premises get replicated to Azure Active Directory. A lot of times this is due to a web proxy being present in the customer infrastructure, and oftentimes these proxies require that when users typically perform browsing attempts to external websites, their browsers are actually configured with the proxy server setting. However, DirSync does not necessarily use the Internet Explorer browser, and therefore doesn't necessarily use the IE browser setting. So DirSync by default will fail against environments where a proxy server is required. What you can do is first of all try to see if you can get an exception so that that DirSync appliance bypasses the proxy. If that's not amenable to your security admins, then what you can also do is configure using netsh with the set proxy command your proxy server and optionally a port number. Oftentimes that will work. In fact, in most cases, that will work. However, if your proxy server does require authentication, and it requires NTLM or BASIC, in many cases, DirSync will also fail to replicate until you enable Kerberos authentication for your proxy server. Also, if you look at the event log on your DirSync appliance, when you're setting it up and trying the DirSync replication for the first time, you'll notice events similar to the following. It will pretty much say that the proxy authentication required. So again, if you also have proxy servers that block specific URLs and your security teams are asking what URLs are required for DirSync to do its job against Office 365, you can a network trace will tell you that that DirSync is trying to get the logon to MicrosoftOnline.com, and also to validate the certificate at the other end that's issued by VeriSign, or which actually may change in the future. May change as GD Cybertrust or Thought, or who knows. You can't just tell your admins, your security admins, to whitelist just these URLs. What you need to do is send them the link to the Office 365 IP ranges and URLs, and that will actually give them the wildcard URLs to allow outbound, not just for the DirSync service, but also any clients that are also needing to access Office 365. Keep in mind that the DirSync service leverages the Office Sign-In Assistant, and the Sign-In Assistant under the hood accesses different URLs than the DirSync service. But in order to authenticate the Sign-In Assistant, each time a management agent runs, the Sign-In Assistant service is actually called in the background. The Sign-In Assistant service is installed automatically with the DirSync appliance. I don't have this as an issue here, but if you actually happen to have the the sign-in assistant service, the online services sign-in assistant service installed prior to installing DirSync, you're also going to fail because most likely the sign-in assistant that you've downloaded and installed on your DirSync, on your soon-to-be DirSync server, is a different version that's incompatible with the with what the DirSync software expects. Okay, DirSync is required to be inside your is required to be domain joined, and also because it needs to talk directly to your domain controllers for various reasons, not just object and attribute and writes and reads, but also for hybrid environments, but also for password changes. Because when users change their password on premises, DirSync may optionally be configured to replicate the password hashes password hashes to Office 365. I'm sorry, to Azure AD. And so we use various ports to connect to various services within your internal infrastructure. And so your DirSync compliance should be within your corporate perimeter. Again, when DirSync connects outbound to Azure AD, the Azure Web Services, it only uses TCP 443, and that is encrypted HTTPS. But occasionally, you may see traffic to unencrypted when DirSync tries to do its CRIL, its certificate revocation checks against the certificate of the, so this would be to, for example, VeriSign to make sure that that certificate has not been revoked. And that would be the certificate to login.microsoftonline.com. Also, if you have a multi-domain forest, DirSync will try to serially replicate domain controllers from each of your domains. So let's say you've got 10 domains in your forest. DirSync tries to hit domain 1, and it has a problem communicating with any domain controller within domain 1. DirSync at that point will fail to replicate all of the subsequent domains. Therefore, domains 2 through 10 will not have any of its changes replicated, even though its DCs are actually able to be connected by the DirSync appliance. So I actually recently had the scenario with a customer with cruise ships where they had DirSync appliance installed on a single cruise ship, and other cruise ships were actually had instances of Active Directory in different domains of the same forest, which could not replicate when the satellite links went out of range. And so even though other ships were within range, they still could not get their changes pushed up to the cloud. So you want to make sure that whenever you design or wherever you place your DirSync server, by the way, there can only be one in the organization that is actively replicating. Wherever you place your DirSync server should have good connectivity with at least one domain controller of each domain in the forest. Okay, so another common issue that we get are what happens when we have objects that were previously placed into Azure Active Directory before the first run of DirSync was actually run. Usually, the problem won't be spelled out as such. The typical case is where a customer says, "Hey, I am not able to locate an object that used to exist in Active Directory," or another issue is I can't locate an object that I expect to show up in Azure Active Directory. Oftentimes that's because DirSync had already run its object matching algorithm. So first of all, let's talk about how the objects could have gotten into Azure AD. Whenever you sign up for your tenant, you actually had the ability to populate objects within users within your tenant simply by going into the portal and creating them directly in the portal. Also, they may have been written into Azure Active Directory, which your portal actually shows you a view of Azure Active Directory, and they may have you may already have tons of accounts that were placed in there from a transition from Forefront Online for protection for Exchange. If you actually had FOPI in the long previously, you may have actually uploaded CSVs of users representing your on-premises email addresses into that service. Later on, when FOPI was retired and transitioned to Exchange Online Protection, Exchange Online Protection leverages Azure Active Directory, and so part of the transition process would have caused the service to copy all of the old FOPI directory objects into your Azure Active Directory. And so that's another way that your Azure Active Directory may have been populated with objects that you don't remember having created manually. And lastly, an admin could have uploaded objects directly into the portal and using a CSV file. Later on, when you run DirSync, DirSync will actually find objects on premises and will try to match based on whether or not there's an object with the same email address to the object in the cloud. As soon as the object in the cloud is found that has not been matched before, DirSync will actually establish a glue parameter. This glue is actually referred to as the immutable ID. As long as the immutable ID in the cloud points to an on-premises object GUID, then that is considered at that point a hard match, and so you can't cause another match to occur with another object on premises. So oftentimes, if we go back to that prior example where you had two objects on premises, or you had a contact on premises that ended up getting matched, or mail user on premises that ended up getting matched with an object in the cloud, and then later on you try to get another object with the same email address, it will fail to replicate to the cloud. However, if that object match did occur, you may start noticing new attributes and possibly a renaming of your accounts in Azure Active Directory. And so hence the problem also occurs where users say, hey, I used to see this user in Azure Active Directory in the portal, I don't see him anymore. Well, that's because his object display name most likely had changed. And that's because the source of authority for that object is now the on-premises Active Directory forest. And so the display name of the on-premises Active Directory object now trumps what the old display name used to be in the Exchange Online directory. So if you want to look at the DirSync matching behavior article, I have it here on this slide as well as in the resources slide at the very end of the deck. Okay, so let's talk about the tools for troubleshooting DirSync. We can, first of all, you want to check your email. As I had shown you on the right-hand side and on the left, you'll periodically, if DirSync has not replicated after 24 hours or 48 hours, you will get periodic emails telling you such. DirSync is supposed to replicate every 3 hours into the tenant. The service actually has a timer that tells you whether or not, or that detects whether or not DirSync is outside of its schedule. And so, this is one useful way that will proactively email you if, for example, you don't realize that DirSync has stopped working due to, for example, a password expiry. Such an email will actually clue you into why DirSync isn't replicating, or into the fact that DirSync isn't replicating, so that you can investigate further. I've had some customers that say they have not been getting these emails, and that's because they've been blocking messages from MicrosoftOnline.com, or messages showed up in their junk mail filter. So they might want to go ahead and just check their junk mail filter to ensure that these messages haven't been piling up in there. Some simple techniques is. I couldn't figure out a good way to title this troubleshooting tool, because it's not a simple single tool, just simple techniques. What you do is just make some tiny changes to objects on premises, just to make sure that these tiny changes do replicate into the cloud. You can, instead of waiting 3 hours, you can force a DirSync by running the start online coexistent sync PowerShell command on the DirSync server. And then make sure that the objects get changed by looking at the Exchange Online directory. You do not want to check for changes in your Outlook client, because your Outlook client of an Exchange Online mailbox is using the offline address book, which is delayed by at least 24 hours from the time that the object is actually changed in the Exchange Online directory. So what you want to do is actually look at the Exchange Online directory using by first going in the portal and then going to Admin Exchange Online, and then verifying that the changes made it there. If you don't want to go through that, but if you happen to have a connection to Azure Active Directory using PowerShell, you can run get msol company information commandlet and look at the last DirSync time value, which will actually tell you the last successful DirSync time. The MIS client.exe. This is actually the tool that's used to manage DirSync. When you install the DirSync service and then you run the DirSync configuration wizard, it configured the management agents, but that's all it did. It did not put anything in your desktop that tells you how to manage DirSync, nor did it create anything in the start menu telling you how to start the DirSync management tool. So what you have to do, unfortunately, is to create a shortcut on the, as I've done here, right here. Oh, give me a second. There you go. So what I've done here is I've just created a shortcut that links back at the service, the executable, nested deep within the DirSync structure, or the DirSync directory structure. And I've documented that path in the slide deck, but it's typically in here. Okay, so if you launch the MIS client, you get a interface, which again shows you the two management agents. And MIS client.exe is the way to configure what Active Directory partitions are used to replicate from your on-premises Active Directory. So let's say you had some containers that you don't want replicated into Azure Active Directory, for example, service accounts, then you can specify the containers here. So I'll simply deselect my root object and then choose just the users and accounts container. And so that's how I can prevent certain security groups from replicating into Azure Active Directory. Now, in the past, we actually said that customizing the container list is not supported. We've actually retracted from that a little bit. By default, DirSync will try to replicate everything. Why? That's because we would rather have all of the users in Exchange Online have the same global address list experience as the users that still have mailboxes on premises. If you end up, inadvertently excluding certain containers that have mail-enabled users, then the users in Exchange Online will actually won't see some accounts when browsing the global address list that the Exchange on-premises users actually do see. Also, encrypted and authenticated mail flow will break if you don't replicate all of the mail-enabled users and mail-enabled distribution groups. So you want to make sure that at a minimum you have all of the mail-enabled objects replicated. So make sure you don't inadvertently exclude containers that have email address enabled objects. Okay, so and then you also have the ability to configure the connector filter. I want to call out that that when we're replicating objects from the on-premises environment, there are some objects that we do exclude from replicating, and this will be objects that have a prefix of system mailbox. The DirSync account that's created when you install DirSync that has been given special permissions to read most of the attributes and also write back a small subset of attributes in the case of a hybrid environment when we do write back a small number of attributes to on premises. Certain special system accounts and objects of type critical system object and some other type objects. And you can also customize it so you can add, as I've done here, objects with that begin with a certain value. Okay, so anything that I add in here will actually be excluded from DirSync. All right. So I've just given you a quick rundown of how to customize the OU filter and attribute filtering of DirSync by administering using the MIS client executable. So back to the presentation at hand here. Depending upon the version of DirSync that you're using, if you're using an old version of DirSync, MIS client is going to be installed in different directory than the new version of DirSync. If you happen to install the brand new AAD sync, I believe it's also underneath a completely separate directory as well. So different from either of these two. Also, AAD sync, even though I set the expectation that we're not going to be talking about covering AAD sync, there is one critical change in AAD sync in that if you want to customize the attributes or OU filtering, you actually have to run the synchronization rules editor rather than MIS client to update those values. Okay, so this PowerShell script that I'm now showing here on the slide is pretty useful for determining what object that's reported in an error corresponds to which object on premises. So as an example, let's take a look at the DirSync object that has an error. Here's that object again that happens to have the error because of a duplicate. We can see here that that doesn't tell us the exact on-premises object. That's tell us the problem object that cannot replicate to Azure AD. So one of the things that we can do here is to look at the distinguish name within the metaverse. This is actually the source anchor, and this is at the same time this is the object in the cloud that has a hard map on-premises object. If I go to Exchange Online and type get-recipient, oh shoot, contractor. I know it is contractor Bob. That's the offending object. Oh, okay, here we go. Let's do this. -ms user -user principal name contractor Bob at search contractor star. Oh, shoot. Okay, so I haven't thought out this demo all the way through, but let's. What I wanted to demonstrate is, let's just get any MSL user. Okay, so I pretty much have exported all of the users and their varying attributes in the cloud simply by running this command, MSL user pipe to FL, and the fact that the immutable ID attribute is populated means that the object has been replicated from a source directory. In this case, it's Active Directory. If I go to the same object, again, it's Cloud 1, in Office 365, we can see here that Cloud 1 is synced with Active Directory. So anything that is synced with Active Directory will have the immutable ID populated. Anything that I created directly in the portal or uploaded into the portal to a CSV by means of a CSV file will not have the immutable ID attribute populated. For example, the global admin account. I go run that. Just search string admin star. Okay, type it to FL, and you'll notice that mutable ID attributes for this account that was created directly in the cloud has a null immutable ID. So going back to the previous object and its immutable ID, like that to FL. Actually, in this case, I did find Bob, contractor Bob, in his on-premises immutable ID. I can take this immutable ID that may have been reported, and I can actually run that GUID to immutable ID script, punch it in, and I get the on-premises object GUID. And so this is an easy way to find the on-premises object GUID is to use the tools such as LDP. And I have a link on how to use LDP later on in the deck. But LDP is a pretty old Active Directory tool that you can view the raw attributes of your on-premises AD object. And I can simply do a search for anything with this GUID. Now let's do a subtree search. Go. We found the offending on-premises object. In this case, it's contractor Bob. So contractor Bob object is actually preventing our employee Bob user object from replicating into Azure Active Directory. All right. So again, what we want to do is, if we didn't know it was contractor Bob, what I would do is I would look at all of the addresses for employee Bob and do a get-recipient for every single one of them until I find a get-recipient line that actually returns 2 objects instead of 1. Okay, back to presentation at hand. Okay, so back in the opposite direction, whoops. If you have an object with all objects on premises have an object GUID. You cannot, and object GUIDs are supposed to be unique. The way that the GUID generation API works is it takes some random time value or the current timestamp value, which should be unique across multiple forests across the world, as well as some machine information, and generates that very unique value. And then that's stamped on the on-premises object when it's created. When DirSync runs, it will write the source push that object GUID value into the source anchor into the metaverse, and then when the Azure Active Directory Management Agent runs, it will write into the immutable ID object in the cloud. If an object already exists in the cloud with that same email address but is lacking immutable ID, at that point the soft match matches, and then immutable ID is populated, and therefore that glue is then permanent. And that's why you can actually tear down your DirSync server, install another DirSync server anywhere else in the forest, and DirSync will pick up right where it left off, because all of the objects that were previously matched in Azure Active Directory will have retained their matches because the immutable ID in the cloud won't have changed. When the new DirSync appliance runs, it will go ahead and recognize that that immutable ID in the cloud already matches something on premises. Okay, let me do a time check here. Okay, so I've got 8 minutes to do 3 more slides, so let me go ahead and continue. IDFix is another tool. It will find most issues that prevent objects from replicating on premises. Unfortunately, it will only scan your on-premises Active Directory, so it doesn't have any knowledge about what exists in the cloud. So you still, in the cloud, may need to run the get-recipient commandlet. However, IDFix can fix things in bulk. It runs through a variety of checks, not just against the proxy addresses field for duplication, but again, as I've mentioned before, any invalid characters in the UPN value, in the mail nickname value, even trailing spaces. So trailing spaces are hard to see with the naked eye, but if a user principal name on premises has a trailing space, then that will actually cause a problem with DirSync. So we will, IDFix tool will flag that. IDFix should not be installed on the DirSync server. It does require some amount of resources, so you want to install IDFix on some other machine. You can actually use the tool, the IDFix tool, to fix objects within the tool. It will actually give you a change list and a file that shows you in case you want to revert those changes. So that's it about IDFix. And again, I already talked about get-recipient. There are two flavors of get-recipient. There's the one that you run against Exchange on premises, and that's you can run it on a workstation that happens to have the Exchange management shell installed, or you can run it directly on the Exchange server. The second type is to run get-recipient against Exchange Online. To do this, you actually have to run a set of PowerShell commands to actually establish a remote or shared session within Exchange Online so that you can actually run that commandlet within the service. Second bullet here, I have an example of where IDFix will fail. Sometimes through various migration scenarios, you may actually have transferred or copied an old object's legacy exchange DN to the X500 distinguished name on a new object. But if you forget to clear out that old object, IDFix won't find this particular issue. There's a few other very minor corner cases that IDFix does not identify, so you still want to run the get-recipient commandlet. Last troubleshooting tool is the event log. The event log is used for troubleshooting whole entire service down type issues, or if a problem exists with the management agent. Or, if, for example, if the service is too busy. It is not so useful when troubleshooting issues pertaining to specific users. So object-level replication problems are better troubleshot using some of the previous tools we had already discussed. I do have a list of resources. One of the resources I'm listing here is the list of attributes that are replicated by DirSync. But if you don't want to refer to an article, you can always go back to directly to the management agents, because the management agents themselves show you what objects are read and write to and from the Azure AD. So as an example, we can go to the attribute flow of the Azure Active Directory Management Agent, and we can actually see some attributes are direct copies into the metaverse. The on-premises company, for example, is written into the company in the SQL Express database, or the SQL database. If you happen to have more than 50,000 objects in your on-premises environment, you will not have installed DirSync with a SQL Express. You would have installed DirSync with full-blown SQL. And then, at the same token, you can go to the Azure Active Directory connector management agent and look at its attribute flow, and you can see the same values replicated from the metaverse into Azure Active Directory. Okay. Most of these are direct one way, but there are a small number of attributes that are replicated back in an Exchange hybrid environment. So if you don't have Exchange installed on premises, you won't see these values replicating back into the metaverse. But because I do have Exchange installed on premises, I chose that when I installed DirSync, I chose the hybrid checkbox. And so it did configure the management agent a little differently so that it does replicate stuff back. For example, archive mailbox settings. If I happen to have if I wanted to leverage unified messaging in the cloud, we also have some attributes corresponding to unified messaging. And also archive mailboxes. If the user has an on-premises mailbox, but an archive mailbox in the cloud, a lot of customers want to take advantage of that practically unlimited archive mailbox in the cloud, even if they have a 50 meg limit on their on-premises mailbox. They would have set up they would have set up a hybrid deployment and given their users the archive mailbox. Sometimes the archive mailbox may change location, so we do need to replicate the archive mailbox GUID link back to the on-premises environment so that when the user opens up Outlook, he is able to read the new endpoint from where to connect to his archive mailbox repository. All right, so that